Let's dive in today. We're going deep with Atomic Habits by James Clear.
Ooh, yeah. This one's a classic.
It is. It's been super popular for a reason, I think. And in this deep dive, we really want to equip you with a solid grasp of how these small changes can actually make a huge difference.
Yeah, like how tiny habits can lead to some really big results.
Exactly. So we're going to be talking about how to build those better habits, how to finally kick those bad ones to the curb, and really getting into the nitty gritty of how those small shifts over time can totally reshape your life. You know what I mean?
Yeah, for sure. One of the things I really appreciate about this book is that Clear goes beyond just, telling you what to do. He digs into the why behind habits, which I think is what makes it such an effective tool for making actual lasting changes.
Totally. And one of the things that really grabbed me right from the start was Clear's own story. He had this massive setback in high school.
Oh, yeah.
This serious baseball injury. We're talking, broken nose, facial fractures, the whole 9 yards.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, it was bad.
Yeah.
But instead of letting that, define him or hold him back, he just kept pushing forward.
Oh.
And you know what he ended up achieving?
What's that?
He became an academic All-American.
Wow. That's incredible. You know what's really important about this story, though, is that Clear emphasizes that it wasn't like some overnight success story.
Right.
It was all about these consistent efforts, these little wins that he racked up over time.
Is that true?
And, his story perfectly embodies that central idea of the book, that tiny changes applied consistently can lead to those remarkable results. It's like that saying, the best time to plant a tree was 20 years ago. The second best time is today.
Love that. And, it's so easy to get caught up in wanting those instant results, right?
Yeah.
But real lasting change, it takes time.
Yeah.
And speaking of small changes adding up to big wins,
Yeah.
the story about British cycling that Clear talks about, that one really hammered that point home for me.
Ah, yeah. British cycling. It's a pretty amazing story, right?
It is. They went from being practically the laughing stock of the cycling world to completely dominating the sport for a whole decade.
It's crazy, and it's all thanks to their coach Dave Brailsford and his philosophy of aggregation of marginal gains.
I love that phrase.
It sounds kind of complicated, right?
Yeah, but
But it's actually pretty straightforward.
okay.
He basically believed that you could find 1% improvements.
1%.
Yeah, 1% improvements in every single area. Not just the obvious stuff, training techniques, but also these seemingly insignificant details.
Oh, wow. Like what?
Like the type of pillows the cyclist slept on, for example.
No way.
Yeah. It's amazing how those tiny tweaks can make a huge difference when you add them all up.
Right. Things you wouldn't even think about normally. It's so cool.
Absolutely. And this approach led British cycling to win multiple Tour de France titles, Olympic gold medals, you name it.
That's insane.
And you know what? Imagine applying that same principle to your own life, to your daily routines, your work habits, your relationships. Those little improvements can compound into something pretty extraordinary.
I love that idea. It's really inspiring.
Yeah.
But I gotta admit, whenever I try to build these, good habits,
Yeah.
I inevitably hit that, what Clear calls the valley of disappointment.
Uh-oh.
That point where you're putting in the work, but it feels like nothing's happening.
Oh, I know that feeling all too well. It's where a lot of people just give up.
Right.
They expect this straight line of progress, but habits, they don't really grow like that. They grow more like a bamboo tree.
A bamboo tree.
Yeah, you might not see anything for years, but beneath the surface, there's this massive root system developing, and then all of a sudden the bamboo just shoots up.
Wow. So we got to just power through that valley then.
Right, exactly. It's about understanding that sometimes the most powerful outcomes are delayed.
I like that. Okay, so how do we actually push through that valley and build those habits that stick?
Yeah.
I'm especially curious about the 4 laws of behavior change that Clear lays out in the book.
Ah, yes. Those 4 laws, they're really the foundation of his approach.
Cool.
They're not just random tips. They're based on a deep understanding of human psychology and how habits actually work.
Okay, so let's break them down. The first law, make it obvious, it starts with this really captivating story about a paramedic
Oh, yeah.
who just instinctively knew that her father-in-law was having a heart attack. It was almost like she had a sixth sense or something.
It's wild, right? And it turns out that she had been unconsciously picking up on these super subtle cues over years of working with heart patients.
No way.
Yeah, and this relates back to our habits because the cues that trigger our behaviors often become invisible to us.
Because they're so routine.
Exactly, we're just so used to them. So Clear suggests creating what he calls a habit scorecard to help us bring those cues to life.
So we can actually become aware of them.
Exactly.
Got it.
Eh.
So instead of just mindlessly going through the motions, we need to pay attention to those triggers.
Right.
Those seemingly small things that set off our habits.
That's the key.
Makes sense. Okay, so what about the second law? Make it attractive.
All right, so this one taps into the idea that we're way more likely to do things that we actually enjoy.
Obviously.
Right. So Clear talks about this concept called temptation bundling.
Okay, I like where this is going.
It's essentially about pairing something you need to do with something you want to do.
Oh, that's smart. Like tricking your brain into doing the right thing.
Exactly. So let's say you really want to watch your favorite show, but you also know you should go for a run.
The struggle.
Well, you could combine those two. You could only allow yourself to watch that show while you're on the treadmill.
Oh, that's a good one.
Right. So the desire for the reward watching the show becomes the driving force for doing the task you've been putting off.
I love it. All right, what about the third law? I'm ready to unpack this one too.
So the third law is make it easy.
Okay.
And it might seem kind of obvious on the surface.
Right.
But honestly, this is where a lot of people trip up.
In what way?
It's about reducing that friction.
Okay.
You know those little barriers that make it harder to stick to a habit?
Oh, I get it.
And Clear actually uses himself as an example here. He shares how he built up this workout habit by committing to going to the gym for just 5 minutes at first.
5 minutes? That seems almost too easy.
That's exactly the point.
Okay.
By setting the bar super low, you eliminate that resistance to starting.
Yeah.
You know, it's like that saying, the journey of 1,000 miles begins with a single step.
Right.
Once you've got that consistency going, then you can gradually increase the duration and the intensity, you know?
I see.
It's also about like optimizing your environment so that those good choices are the path of least resistance.
Oh, yeah. That reminds me of the 2-minute rule.
Exactly.
It's like you break down a habit into something that takes less than 2 minutes to do.
Right.
Which just feels so much more manageable than tackling the whole thing at once. You know?
Totally. Instead of trying to write a whole chapter, you just focus on writing one paragraph. Or instead of cleaning the entire house, you start with just clearing off the kitchen counter.
Love it. Little wins.
Exactly. It's all about building that momentum and overcoming that initial inertia.
Makes sense.
Think about it. Have you ever been more likely to skip a workout if you have to drive all the way across town to get to the gym?
Oh, absolutely. Convenience is key for sure. Okay, so we've got making habits obvious, attractive, and easy. What about the fourth law? Make it satisfying.
All right, so this one taps into the brain's reward system.
Okay.
Basically, we're more likely to repeat behaviors that give us that sense of satisfaction, you know, that feel-good feeling.
Right.
Clear uses this example of Stephen Luby, who's a public health worker, and he was trying to improve hand washing rates in Pakistan.
Interesting.
And he found that just giving people information wasn't enough.
Really?
Yeah, people needed an immediate reward.
Huh.
So he introduced this new type of soap that foamed really easily and smelled amazing.
Okay.
And it actually worked. People started washing their hands more because they enjoyed the experience.
That's fascinating. It's like positive reinforcement, you know, like when you're training a dog.
Exactly. It's the same principle. By associating a positive feeling with a habit, we're more likely to stick with it.
Okay. So how can we apply that to our own lives?
Well, it can be as simple as, you know, marking your progress on a habit tracker. Maybe giving yourself a little treat, or even just savoring that feeling of accomplishment.
Right. Like really taking a moment to acknowledge those small wins.
Exactly. The key is to bridge that gap between doing the work and seeing those long-term benefits.
Gotcha. These 4 laws, they really do give you like a solid framework for hacking your habits. But I'm curious, how do these ideas about making habits satisfying,
Yeah,
how do they tie into that concept of identity that Clear talks about?
that's a great question.
Because it seems to be saying that our habits are kind of a reflection of who we believe we are.
You're spot on. He really emphasizes the idea that true behavior change often starts with identity change. The habits we form and maintain, they're often expressions of our self-image.
Oh, I see.
So if you see yourself as someone who's disciplined and health conscious,
Yeah.
you're more likely to make choices that align with that identity.
Right. Like eating healthy, exercising regularly, that kind of thing.
Exactly. So it becomes less about willpower and more about becoming the kind of person who naturally does those things.
Okay. So it's really a mindset shift.
Exactly. Instead of saying, I want to lose weight, you start saying, I'm the kind of person who prioritizes their health.
I like that. It takes the pressure off of having to force yourself all the time.
Right. And your actions just become a natural extension of that belief.
That's really empowering.
Yeah.
Okay, but building a new identity, I mean, that takes time, right?
It definitely does. It's a process of proving to yourself through your actions that you are that person.
Okay.
And every time you make a choice that aligns with your desired identity, you're strengthening that self-belief.
It's like casting votes for the person you want to become. But I think a lot of us get hung up on goals,
Oh, yeah.
setting these big targets and then feeling discouraged when we don't hit them right away.
Clear actually argues that we tend to overemphasize goals. Yeah. While they're important for direction, it's the systems we build that really drive progress.
So instead of obsessing over the end result,
Right.
we should focus on building a system that supports those desired outcomes.
Exactly. It's about creating a set of rules and routines that guide your actions, almost like an operating system for your life.
Okay, I think I'm starting to get the bigger picture here. You build a system that makes it easier to stick to your habits.
Right.
Those habits then reinforce your desired identity, and ultimately that leads to the outcomes you want.
Precisely. It's a virtuous cycle.
I love that. And the beauty of this approach is that it's sustainable.
Exactly.
It's not about white-knuckling your way to success. It's about creating a lifestyle that supports your goals and aligns with who you want to be.
Absolutely.
All right. So let's talk about some practical tools for building those better systems and solidifying those good habits. One thing that always helps me is using a habit tracker.
Oh, habit trackers are amazing.
Right.
They give you that visual representation of your consistency.
Yeah, and it's just so satisfying to see that progress, right?
It's super motivating. Plus, it helps you spot patterns in your behavior.
Like what?
Like maybe you notice that you're more likely to skip your workout on Wednesdays,
Oh,
or that you tend to overeat in the evenings.
huh. Interesting. So those insights can be really helpful for making adjustments to your routine or your environment.
Exactly.
Okay. But what about those times when you just don't feel like doing the habit?
Oh, yeah. We all have those days.
Right. When motivation is just low.
Absolutely. Motivation fluctuates.
Yeah.
So having a system that doesn't rely solely on willpower is key.
Makes sense.
We talked about the 2-minute rule, and temptation bundling is another great one. But even something as simple as reframing your thinking about the habit can help.
Okay. Like how?
So instead of viewing exercise as a chore,
Yeah.
focus on how good it makes you feel afterwards.
Right. So it's about finding the positive aspects, even if it's something you'd rather not do at that moment.
Exactly. And sometimes it's honestly just about acknowledging that you're not going to be 100% motivated all the time. Clear emphasizes the importance of never missing twice.
But what's that?
So if you slip up, don't beat yourself up. Just get back on track the next day.
It's about consistency, not perfection.
Exactly.
Mm-hmm.
And I think we often put so much pressure on ourselves to do everything perfectly.
Right. It's easy to fall into that trap.
And that pressure can be paralyzing. It's important to be kind to ourselves and to view those slip-ups as learning opportunities, not as failures.
I like that.
And this ties back into the idea of identity.
Okay.
When you have a strong sense of who you are and what you stand for,
Uh-huh.
those temporary setbacks are less likely to derail you.
It's like you have this anchor, this core belief system that keeps you grounded,
Exactly.
even when things get tough.
Right. And speaking of tough,
Yeah.
what about those times when you're doing all the right things, you're being consistent,
Uh-huh.
but you're just not seeing the results you want?
Oh, yeah. I've been there.
This is where understanding the plateau of latent potential can be really helpful.
Okay. I'm intrigued. Tell me more about that.
So the plateau of latent potential, it's basically that phase where you're putting in the work, you're showing up consistently,
Yeah.
but the outward results, they just haven't caught up yet. It's kind of like you're building this solid foundation, but the structure hasn't quite emerged above ground yet.
So it's that point where people might get discouraged,
Right.
and think, oh, this isn't working.
Yeah.
Even though they're actually making progress, it's just not visible yet.
Exactly. It's easy to get caught up in wanting that instant gratification, but real change often takes time.
Right.
Clear emphasizes that progress isn't always linear,
Okay.
There are periods of slow growth followed by these sudden breakthroughs.
I can see that.
Think about learning a new language or a musical instrument. It can feel like you're not making any headway for a while, and then suddenly things just click.
Oh, yeah, for sure. It's like that feeling when you're working on a puzzle and you can't find the right piece for ages.
Yes.
And then finally it slots into place.
Right.
And you see the bigger picture more clearly.
That's a great analogy. And just like with that puzzle, it's important to keep going even when it feels like you're not making progress.
Right.
It's those moments of persistence that ultimately lead to those satisfying breakthroughs.
Okay, so how do we stay motivated and push through those plateaus where it seems like nothing's happening?
One strategy is to shift your focus from the product to the process. Remember how we talked about the power of systems?
Yeah.
Well, this is where that mindset really comes in handy.
Okay.
When you're too fixated on the outcome, those periods of slow growth, they can be super frustrating.
Right, because you're not seeing the results you want.
Exactly. But when you can find satisfaction in the act of doing the habit itself, you're less likely to get derailed.
So it's like enjoying the journey, not just the destination.
Precisely. So instead of just focusing on, losing 10 pounds, you find joy in moving your body and making healthier choices.
Yeah. It's about finding that intrinsic motivation.
Right.
That sense of fulfillment that comes from just showing up consistently and doing the work,
Yeah.
even when you're not seeing those immediate results.
Exactly.
And patience is key.
Oh, absolutely.
Building lasting habits, it takes time.
It's a marathon, not a sprint.
Very true.
Well,
And sometimes those marathons take us through some pretty challenging terrain.
oh yeah, for sure.
Speaking of challenges, I'm curious about how we can make those good habits stick, even when life gets crazy busy,
One of Clear's biggest points is the importance of reducing friction.
Right.
Those little barriers that make it harder to stick to a habit.
Makes sense. We've talked about making habits obvious, attractive, and easy,
Right.
but is there more to it than that?
There's another layer, and
Yeah.
that's minimizing cognitive load.
Cognitive load.
Yeah.
Okay, I've heard that term before,
Mm-hmm.
but I'm not sure I fully understand it. What does it mean in the context of habits?
So cognitive load basically refers to the amount of mental effort it takes to complete a task.
Okay,
And the higher the cognitive load, the more willpower it requires.
I see.
And as we know, willpower is a limited resource.
Right. We only have so much of it.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So to make habits stick, we want to reduce that mental effort as much as possible.
So it's not just about physical effort.
Yeah.
It's about mental effort as well.
Precisely. If something feels too mentally taxing, we're less likely to do it.
Yeah, that makes sense. Even if it's good for us.
Exactly. And one of the best ways to reduce that cognitive load is to automate as much of the process as possible. We live in a world where we can automate so many things.
Right, like bill payments, grocery deliveries.
Exactly. Why not leverage that technology to automate our good habits as well?
That's a great point. I use a habit tracking app to remind me to drink water throughout the day.
Perfect example.
It's so much easier than trying to remember on my own.
Right. And there are tons of other tools and techniques we can use.
Like what?
We can use meal planning apps to take the mental effort out of deciding what to eat,
Okay.
set up automatic savings transfers to make saving money effortless, or even hire a virtual assistant to handle those tasks that just drain our mental energy.
So it's like outsourcing those aspects of our lives that create unnecessary friction,
Exact.
freeing up our mental space for the things that truly matter.
Precisely. And remember, automation isn't about being lazy. It's about being strategic with your time and energy.
Right.
It's about creating a system that supports your goals and allows you to focus on what's most important.
I love that reframing. Okay, so as we wrap up our deep dive into Atomic Habits, is there one key takeaway, one overarching message that you hope our listeners will walk away with?
I think the most important takeaway is that small changes consistently applied can lead to extraordinary results.
So true.
It's about embracing that power of 1% improvements,
Yeah.
finding those tiny tweaks we can make to our daily lives,
Right.
like over time, compound into something truly remarkable.
It's that idea that we don't need to make these drastic changes to see significant progress.
Yeah, exactly.
It's the small, seemingly insignificant actions that, when repeated, consistently create that lasting transformation.
Precisely. And remember, building better habits, it's not about perfection. It's about progress. It's about showing up each day and striving to be just a little bit better than you were yesterday.
Love it.
And as James Clear reminds us, success is the product of daily habits, not once-in-a-lifetime transformations.
What a fantastic way to sum it all up. So, to our listeners, as you go forth on your habit building journey, remember to be patient, be persistent,
Yeah.
and most importantly, be kind to yourself.
And never underestimate the power of those small changes.
This has been such an insightful deep dive into Atomic Habits. Thank you for joining us on this journey of exploration and discovery. Until next time, keep those positive habits flowing. All right, ready to dive deep into Atomic Habits by James Clear. I'm so excited to unpack these principles with you.
Oh, it's such a good one.
You've sent over some really thought-provoking excerpts.
Yeah.
And I have to admit, I'm particularly drawn to Clear's personal story.
Yeah.
I mean, talk about walking the walk.
Right.
To go from a life-altering injury in high school to becoming an academic All-American. It's like
It's pretty
a
amazing.
real testament to the power of habits, wouldn't you say?
Absolutely. And that's exactly what kind of shaped his whole approach. You
Yeah.
know, those small changes, what he calls atomic habits.
Right.
They can accumulate and create these remarkable transformations over time.
He often compares habits to the compound interest of self-improvement.
Yeah.
Can you unpack that analogy a bit? What makes it so powerful in the context of habits?
Well, think about it like this.
Okay.
If you were to improve just 1%, like a tiny little bit, each day for a year, you'd end up 37 times better by the end of the year. So it's not about like these massive overnight changes, right?
Yeah,
It's really the consistency of
Yeah.
these small wins over time.
I like that.
And that's where the compound interest idea comes in.
Yeah.
The longer you stick with those small improvements,
Okay.
the more dramatic the results you're going to get.
It's like those tiny actions create this ripple effect,
Exactly.
amplifying their impact over time.
And it goes both ways too.
What do you mean?
It applies to both good and bad habits.
Oh, that's a good point.
So even those little seemingly insignificant choices we make every day, ultimately they kind of determine our trajectory.
Wow, I like that.
Yeah, time really magnifies those small margins between success and failure.
This brings us to a point that really intrigued me in the book.
Okay.
This whole idea of focusing on systems rather than goals.
Yeah.
Seems counterintuitive, right?
It does at first.
Yeah.
But Clear makes a really compelling case for it.
Okay, I'm listening.
He's basically saying that goals are about the results you want, right?
Okay.
But systems are about the processes that get you there.
So how does that play out in real life?
Well, let's say you set a goal to lose weight, but it's your daily habits, the system,
Oh, I see.
the exercise routine, the eating choices.
Right.
Those are what actually move you towards that goal.
So the goal is important,
It is. It sets the direction.
but the system gets you there.
Exactly. He gives the example of financial success.
Okay.
He argues it's a lagging measure of your financial habits.
Okay, so my current financial situation.
Right. That's a reflection of past choices.
If I want to change my future finances,
You got to change those present habits.
that makes total sense.
It's like setting up those dominoes
Yeah.
so they can fall in sequence.
Now, how do we actually go about building those effective systems? I know Clear introduces this framework he calls the 4 laws of behavior change.
This is where it gets fun.
Okay, let's hear it.
These 4 laws, cue, craving, response, and reward,
Right.
they kind of work together in a loop to create habits.
So understanding this loop.
That's key for building good habits and breaking bad ones.
Got it. Okay, so break down each law for me
Sure.
and how it contributes to the whole habit loop.
All right, so first you've got the cue,
Okay.
and that's basically the trigger that starts the behavior.
So like what?
Could be anything.
Yeah.
Like seeing your phone light up with a notification.
That little bang.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, then what?
Well, then that cue triggers a craving.
Right.
And that's kind of the motivational force behind the habit.
Mm-hmm.
The desire for the reward, the habit promises.
So it's like I see the notification.
Right.
That's the cue.
Right.
And the craving is that like anticipation of seeing what it is
Totally.
and getting that little dopamine hit.
Exactly. Dopamine plays a huge role here.
Yeah. Okay. What's next?
So then comes the response,
Okay.
which is the actual habit you do.
Like picking up the phone and checking the notification.
Yeah, that's it.
Okay.
And finally, you have the reward, the satisfying outcome of the habit.
So like if it's a funny post, I get a little laugh.
Exactly.
Okay. And then that makes me more likely to do it again.
Right. The reward reinforces the whole loop.
Fascinating.
Yeah. And the cool thing is,
Right.
we can use these laws to design our habits.
Oh, interesting.
Like, let's say you're trying to build a meditation habit.
Okay.
You'd want to make that cue obvious, the craving attractive, the response easy, and the reward satisfying.
So like hacking the habit loop.
Right.
Okay, I like it. How would that work for meditation?
Well, for the cue, you could put your meditation cushion in a visible spot.
Okay.
To make the craving attractive, you could remind yourself of how calm it makes you feel.
Right, right.
To make the response easy, start with just a few minutes a day.
Yeah, that's doable.
And for the reward, maybe you journal about your experience afterward.
I like it. It's like we can take control instead of feeling controlled.
Exactly.
Now, you know what else really stood out to me?
What's that?
How Clear talks about environment design.
Oh, yeah, it's so important.
We often underestimate how our surroundings shape our behavior.
It's true. We think we're in control,
Yeah.
but our environment plays a huge role.
He has this great line.
Oh, yeah.
You don't rise to the level of your goals, you fall to the level of your systems.
I love that one.
And our environment is a huge part of that system.
Absolutely.
He has this great example in the book
Oh, yeah.
about a hospital cafeteria.
Tell me about it.
They wanted to encourage healthy eating,
Okay.
but instead of lecturing people, they just rearranged the cafeteria.
What did they do?
They put the healthier foods in more visible and accessible spots.
Interesting. And did it work?
It did. People started choosing healthier options
Wow.
just because of that simple change.
It's amazing what a little nudge can do.
So if we want to change our habits, we need to look beyond willpower
Totally.
and shape our environment.
Absolutely.
It worked for us.
I mean, think about it. If you want to read more,
Yeah.
always have a book within reach, trying to cut down screen time, move the TV out of the bedroom.
Or keep your phone in a different room.
Right. Make those good choices easier.
Make the path of least resistance lead to where you want to go.
Exactly.
It's fascinating how much control we can have
Yeah.
once we understand the underlying principles.
Absolutely.
Now, what about when we want to build new habits? I know Clear talks about habit stacking and implementation intentions.
Those are great tools.
Yeah, tell me about them.
Well, habit stacking leverages existing habits to create new ones.
So how does that work exactly?
Well, let's say you want to start a gratitude practice.
Okay.
You could stack it onto brushing your teeth.
Oh, interesting.
So every time you brush your teeth, you also write down 3 things you're grateful for.
You're piggybacking the new habit onto the old one?
Exactly. Makes
Yeah.
it easier to remember.
I like that. And what about implementation intentions?
Those add a layer of specificity.
Okay.
So instead of just saying, I'll meditate more,
Yeah.
you say, I'll meditate for 10 minutes at 7 a.m. in the living room.
So you define the when and where.
Exactly. Removes any guesswork.
Makes it much more likely you'll do it.
Right.
These techniques are so practical.
They really are.
I can definitely see myself using them.
Awesome.
You know, you mentioned earlier how Claire talks about the importance of identity
Yeah.
in relation to habits. I'm curious about that. How does that all fit in?
Well, it's about changing our beliefs about ourselves.
Okay.
Our behaviors are usually a reflection of those beliefs.
So if I see myself as someone who's always late, it's going to be hard to be punctual.
Right, because that habit wouldn't align with your self-image.
Okay.
But if you believe you value other people's time,
Then punctuality becomes natural.
exactly, it's an extension of who you are.
It's like our habits are trying to align with our internal sense of self.
That's a great way to put it.
So it's not just about changing actions.
Yeah.
It's about changing our beliefs.
It's a shift from I'm trying to be more organized
Yeah.
to I am an organized person.
I like that.
And that can be incredibly powerful.
Now, I know Clear shares a story about himself
Oh, yeah.
where he initially felt uncomfortable being called a habit expert.
Right. He didn't see himself that way.
And it shows how our identities can sometimes hold us back.
It's true. We got to embrace those new identities as we grow.
So it's not just about changing our habits.
Right.
It's changing the stories we tell ourselves about who we are.
You got it.
That's so powerful. I can't wait to dive deeper into all this.
There's so much more to explore.
This is just the beginning.
We're just getting started.
Buckle up, everyone.
This is going to be a great ride.
We'll be back soon for part 2 of our deep dive into atomic habits.
See you then.
Welcome back. It's amazing how these small changes we were talking about can lead to such significant transformations over time.
It's really about shifting our perspective. You know,
Yeah.
like moving away from those big dramatic changes
Right.
and embracing those consistent incremental improvements.
And you know what? I've been thinking a lot about the habit loop
Yeah.
since our last conversation. That cue, craving, response, and reward cycle.
It's powerful stuff.
It really gives you a sense of control, doesn't it?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Once you understand those automatic patterns,
Right.
you can start to design habits that really work for you.
And I know Clear suggests using something called the habit scorecard to become more aware of those patterns.
Oh, yeah, that's a great tool.
What exactly is it?
Well, you basically just list out all your daily habits.
Okay.
Like everything from when you wake up to when you go to sleep.
So it's like a complete inventory of your day.
Exactly. And then you reflect on each habit.
Okay.
You ask yourself if it's beneficial, harmful, or neutral.
So you're basically evaluating.
Yeah, seeing which habits are actually serving you.
And which ones are maybe holding you back.
Exactly. It brings those unconscious patterns to light,
I like that.
gives you a chance to make more conscious choices.
It's like shining a light on those autopilot behaviors.
Right. You can finally ask, are these taking me where I want to go?
Now, once you've identified those habits, how do you actually change them?
Well, that's where those 4 laws of behavior change come back in.
Oh, right.
So let's say you want to break a habit.
Like what? Give me an example.
Let's say spending too much time on social media.
Oh, that's a big one for me.
Yeah, for a lot of people.
So how could I use the 4 laws to break that habit?
Well, to make the cue less obvious, you could delete those apps from your phone,
Okay.
or at least log out of your accounts.
That would definitely make it less tempting.
Right. And to make the craving less attractive,
Yeah.
remind yourself of how social media makes you feel
Sometimes it leaves me feeling anxious, to be honest.
and compare yourself to others.
Exactly.
And to make the response more difficult. You could put your phone away while you're working
yeah.
or set time limits on those apps.
Make it a little less convenient to access them.
Exactly. And finally, to make the reward less satisfying, you could replace that social media time with something you genuinely enjoy.
Like reading or going for a walk.
Yeah, or spending time with loved ones.
It's amazing how understanding those 4 laws can be so empowering.
It really gives you a sense of control
It's like having a set of tools to shape your behavior.
to be more intentional.
Exactly. But it's not just about changing our actions, right?
No.
We were talking about the importance of aligning our identity with our desired habits.
That's key. Our behaviors often reflect our beliefs about ourselves.
I mean, if I see myself as lazy, it's going to be hard to be productive.
Exactly. Those habits wouldn't match your self-image.
But if I start to believe I value hard work,
Then productivity becomes more natural.
it becomes an extension of who you are.
Right. It's like those habits become integrated into your sense of self.
It's a shift from I'm trying to be more organized to I am an organized person. That's a powerful distinction.
It really is.
And I remember Clear shared that story about himself.
Oh, right, about being called a habit expert.
Yeah, he initially felt uncomfortable with that label.
Because he didn't see himself that way at first.
Right. It just shows how our identities can hold us back sometimes.
We have to embrace those new identities as we grow and evolve.
It's not just about changing our habits. It's about changing the stories we tell ourselves about who we are.
Love that. Such a powerful way to put it.
And it made me think this applies to more than just individual habits, right?
You're right. It applies to families, communities, even societies.
So it's like collective habits.
Exactly. And Clear actually shares a fascinating story in the book.
Oh, tell me about it.
It's about the Polgar sisters.
Those chess prodigies.
Yeah. They were raised with the belief that genius could be cultivated.
So it wasn't just natural talent.
Well, their father believed that deliberate practice and a supportive environment were key.
And it worked. They achieved incredible success.
They did. And their story really highlights the power of environment and social norms.
So they grew up in a home where chess was just a part of life.
Exactly. Their parents created an environment that supported those chess playing habits.
It's amazing how much our social context can influence us.
It really is. We often think of habits as individual choices,
Right.
but they're also shaped by the cultures we're part of.
Makes you wonder how many of our habits are influenced by the groups we belong to.
It's a powerful question to ponder.
Now, we've been talking a lot about the positive side of habits, but I know Clear also acknowledges that they can become a trap sometimes.
He does. He talks about habit discontinuity.
What's that?
It's when those ingrained habits no longer serve us.
So like when our old habits don't fit our new circumstances.
Exactly. It could be a big life change, like a new job.
Or even a shift in our values.
Right. It's a chance for growth.
But it can be tough to let go of those old patterns.
It can, but it's also an opportunity to reevaluate.
To make conscious choices about which habits we want to keep.
And which ones to let go of.
So how do we navigate those habit discontinuities successfully?
Clear suggests cultivating flexibility and a willingness to experiment.
So being open to adapting and adjusting our habits as needed.
Exactly. Embracing that growth mindset.
Recognizing that our habits are not set in stone.
Right. They should evolve as we do.
And that leads to the idea of habit shaping, doesn't it?
It does. It's about making those small adjustments over time.
rather than trying to change everything at once,
Right, so instead of trying to write for an hour every day,
which can feel overwhelming.
you could start with just one sentence.
That feels much more manageable.
And once that becomes easy, you gradually increase it.
A paragraph, then a page.
Exactly. It's about building momentum.
Through those small wins.
And it all ties back to those atomic habits.
The power of tiny changes over time.
Exactly.
You know, one thing I often struggle with
What's that?
is the delayed gratification aspect of building good habits.
Yeah, I hear you.
I might exercise today, but I don't see the results for weeks.
Right, our brains are wired for immediate rewards.
So how do we bridge that gap? Make those good habits more immediately satisfying.
Well, that's where Clear's fourth law comes in. Make it satisfying.
Yeah.
We need to find a way to make the habit enjoyable in the moment.
But how do we do that? How do we actually make those good habits more enjoyable?
Well, there are a few things you can try.
Okay.
One is using reinforcement, like rewarding yourself for progress.
So like if I'm trying to write more, I could reward myself with a cup of tea after finishing a certain amount.
Exactly, you're creating positive associations with the habit.
And habit tracking can be really helpful too.
It is, it gives you visual proof of your progress.
And Clear also talks about celebrating those small wins.
Those little victories along the way.
It's about acknowledging your progress and keeping that momentum going.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Enjoy the journey, not just the destination.
Yeah. Now, what about breaking bad habits? Any tips on that?
Clear suggests making them as impractical as possible.
So if I want to cut back on junk food,
You got to get it out of the house.
remove those temptations.
Right, make it harder to give in to those impulses.
So it's all about designing your environment for success.
Absolutely. Set yourself up to win.
It's amazing how much Clear covers in Atomic Habits.
He really provides a comprehensive and practical approach.
I feel like I have a whole new understanding of how habits work.
And a new set of tools to shape them.
This has been such a rich and insightful conversation.
It really has.
Back again for more Atomic Habits. I'm loving all this practical wisdom from James Clear.
It's such a good one.
The one thing that really stuck with me is his emphasis on the long game.
Oh, yeah.
You know, it's not about some overnight transformation. It's
Yeah.
those small, consistent actions that add up over time.
He really encourages us to shift our focus.
Yeah.
From being motivated
Yeah.
to being consistent.
What's the difference? Why is that so important for habits?
Well, motivation can be kind of fleeting.
Oh yeah, you feel super pumped one day and then the next day, nothing.
Exactly. Life gets in the way.
Right.
But consistency, that's about showing up every day.
Even when you don't feel like it.
Exactly. Make it a non-negotiable part of your routine.
He uses that great analogy of the airplane.
Oh, yeah, I love that one.
A pilot adjusts the course by just a few degrees.
Right.
But over a long flight,
Yeah,
it makes a huge difference.
exactly. Same with our habit.
Small changes, big results.
And that's the power of compounding.
Right, those little 1% improvements can really accumulate.
He has that visual in the book with the 2 lines on the graph.
Oh yeah, tell me about that.
One line shows someone making those 1% improvements over a year,
Okay.
and the other shows someone staying the same.
At first, they're pretty close together.
Right. Barely any difference. But over time, that gap just widens.
the person making those small improvements ends up way ahead.
It's like the difference between simple interest and compound interest.
I get it. With simple interest, you only earn on the principal.
Right.
But with compound interest, you earn on the principal and the accumulated interest.
Exactly. It grows exponentially.
Oh, we gotta play the long game.
Absolutely. Trust that those small efforts will pay off.
And be patient.
So important. Clear talks about that too.
Yeah.
There's often a delay between starting a habit and seeing the results.
Like planting a seed.
Perfect analogy. You gotta nurture it, give it time to grow.
And he talks about the plateau of latent potential.
Oh yeah, that's a good one.
It's that point where you're putting in the work.
But not seeing the results yet.
It can be so discouraging.
It's totally natural to feel that way.
But Claire says we gotta stay the course.
Trust the process.
That the work is being stored up.
Like building a foundation.
And then eventually you break through.
To the outside world, it looks like overnight success.
But it's really the result of all those consistent efforts.
Exactly. So focus on the process, not just the outcome.
I like that. Trust the process.
And remember, make those good habits enjoyable.
Right. Our brains love instant gratification.
So we need to make those habits satisfying in the moment.
We were talking about intrinsic rewards.
Yeah, finding the joy in the activity itself.
But are there other strategies for making good habits more appealing?
Definitely. Clear talks about using reinforcement.
Oh, like rewarding yourself.
Exactly. Give yourself a little treat after completing a certain amount.
A little celebration.
Right. Create positive associations.
And I'm a big fan of habit tracking.
It's so helpful.
It's like visual proof of your progress.
Those check marks can be really motivating.
And don't forget about celebrating those small wins.
Absolutely. Acknowledge those little victories.
It keeps you going.
Enjoy the journey, right?
Absolutely. Now, what about breaking bad habits? What does Clear say about that?
He's all about making those bad habits as impractical as possible.
Okay, so like, if I want to eat less junk food,
Get it out of the house.
no temptations around.
Right. Remove those cues.
Make it harder to give in.
Design your environment to support those good choices.
It all comes back to that.
It does. Set yourself up for success.
I have to say, Atomic Habits is such a great resource.
It really is.
Clear's approach is so practical.
And inspiring.
I feel like I have a whole new understanding of how to shape my habits.
It's empowering, isn't it?
It is. It's all about those small, consistent changes.
Those 1% improvements.
And believing in our ability to grow and change.
Absolutely. It's a journey, not a destination.
So well said. If you're looking for a practical guide to unlock your potential,
Atomic Habits is a must-read.
so much wisdom packed into one book.
It can really help you create lasting change.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive.
It's been a pleasure.
Until next time, keep exploring, keep learning, and keep building those atomic habits.